My name is Barnett Aldridge, and I just turned 68 years old. After my wife passed, I tried to stay close with my son Thomas and his family, despite subtle changes in their behavior. Yesterday was my birthday. Not a single call or text. I sent a simple message expressing my hurt. Hours later, my son replied, "We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore at all." His wife Amanda even liked the message. So I blocked them all and cut off their access to the family fortune they'd been living off. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt the sting of family rejection. I wasn't always well off. My story begins in a small town in Ohio where my father worked at the local steel mill and my mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families across the river. We lived paycheck to paycheck in a modest 2-bedroom house that always needed repairs. My parents did their best, but there were many nights when dinner was whatever could be stretched the furthest. Despite their financial struggles, they taught me the value of hard work and perseverance. By 16, I was working 2 jobs after school, one at the local grocery store stocking shelves and another mowing lawns on weekends. Every dollar I earned went into an old coffee can I kept hidden under a loose floorboard in my bedroom. My friends would drive around town on Friday nights, but I was too busy saving for something bigger. College seemed like an impossible dream for someone like me, but I was determined. After graduating high school, I had saved nearly $4,000. Not enough for a 4-year degree, but enough to start at community college while working full-time. I studied construction management during the day and worked as a night security guard at a warehouse. 4 hours of sleep became my normal. There were moments when exhaustion hit so hard that I questioned if it was worth it, but I kept pushing. By 25, I had my degree and enough experience to land a job with a mid-sized construction company. I learned everything I could, volunteered for the projects no one wanted, and stayed later than everyone else. The owner, Mr. Fitzgerald, took notice. He became my mentor, teaching me not just about construction, but about business management, client relationships, and financial planning. When I was 32, Mr. Fitzgerald offered me a partnership opportunity. I didn't have the money, but I had a plan. I took a second mortgage on my small house, borrowed what I could from the bank, and became a junior partner. 5 years later, when Mr. Fitzgerald retired, I bought him out completely. Barnett Construction grew steadily under my leadership. We specialized in commercial buildings and developed a reputation for quality work delivered on schedule. There were hard times too. The recession of the early 90s nearly bankrupted us. I went without salary for 8 months to keep my employees paid. Then the housing crash of 2008 hit just as we were expanding into residential development. But we survived, while many competitors folded. By the time I considered retirement, Barnett Construction employed over 200 people and had projects across 3 states. From that scared kid counting pennies in a coffee can, I had built something substantial, something I was proud of. I met Linda during those early partnership years with Fitzgerald. She was working as an administrative assistant at an architecture firm we frequently collaborated with. Linda was everything I wasn't: organized, detail-oriented, and socially graceful. She had this ability to walk into a room and make everyone feel important. We complemented each other perfectly. We married after a year of dating, and Thomas came along 2 years later. Linda stepped back from full-time work to raise him, though she kept her hand in the business by handling our books from home. She was brilliant with numbers and saved us from making some costly mistakes more than once. Thomas was our only child. Linda had complications during his birth that prevented us from having more children, so we poured everything into him. Perhaps too much, looking back. We wanted him to have all the advantages I never had growing up. The best schools, summer camps, sports equipment, family vacations. Whatever Thomas needed or wanted, we provided. When Thomas met Amanda in college, Linda had reservations. She's very focused on appearances, she told me privately after their first dinner together. But Thomas was smitten, and I was happy to see my son happy. They married shortly after graduation, with us covering the entire cost of an extravagant wedding that Amanda had always dreamed of. I helped them with the down payment on a house, much larger than a young couple needed. Amanda had specific requirements: the right neighborhood, the right school district, the right street. The mortgage payments were steep, so I brought Thomas into the family business. He had studied marketing, not construction, but I created a position for him anyway. Business development with a generous salary. Their children came along quickly. Jackson first, then Sophie 3 years later. Beautiful, healthy grandchildren who became the light of Linda's life. We set up college funds for both of them immediately and began contributing monthly. As the grandchildren grew, so did Thomas and Amanda's lifestyle. Private schools, music lessons, sports clubs with expensive equipment. Family vacations became more elaborate each year. Thomas would casually mention their financial strain, and I would quietly increase his bonus or provide extra funds. Linda would caution me about creating dependency, but I brushed it off. I could afford it, and I wanted my family to be comfortable. When Linda was diagnosed with cancer 5 years ago, everything changed. The disease progressed rapidly, despite aggressive treatment. We had been married for nearly 40 years when she passed away 3 years ago. The foundation of my world crumbled. Thomas and Amanda were supportive at first, helping with funeral arrangements and checking in regularly. But as the months passed, something shifted in our relationship. The first 6 months after Linda's death passed in a blur of grief. I threw myself into work despite being past retirement age, staying at the office until 9 or 10 at night. Weekends were the hardest. The house echoed with memories of Linda. Her garden withered without her care. Her books remained on the nightstand, bookmarks still in place. Thomas and Amanda initially invited me for Sunday dinners, but these invitations became less frequent. Thomas is swamped with work, Amanda would explain when canceling. The kids have so many activities this weekend. Reasonable excuses, but a pattern was emerging. When I did visit their home, I noticed subtle changes. Conversations stopped abruptly when I entered rooms. Thomas appeared tense, checking his phone constantly. Amanda would steer discussions toward their financial challenges. The new roof they needed, private school tuition increases, the European vacation they were planning for summer. Jackson and Sophie, once eager to show me their schoolwork or latest interests, became increasingly distant. Jackson, at 13 then, would barely look up from his gaming device. Sophie would offer a quick hug before disappearing to her room. When I asked Thomas about these changes, he dismissed my concerns. "Teenagers, Dad. That's normal behavior. Don't take it personally." But it felt personal, especially when I overheard Sophie ask Amanda why they didn't visit Grandpa more often. "Grandpa's very busy with work," Amanda had replied, "and he prefers to be alone these days." Neither statement was true. I had been actively trying to spend more time with them. Invitations to baseball games, offers to take Sophie shopping, suggestions of family trips, all met with polite refusals or last-minute cancellations. Meanwhile, at the company, Thomas began pushing for more control. He arranged meetings with clients without informing me. He hired new marketing staff without consultation. When I questioned these decisions, his responses became increasingly defensive. "The company needs to modernize, Dad. Your methods are outdated." I tried to be open to change while maintaining the core values that had made Barnett Construction successful, but Thomas seemed interested only in expansion, not in maintaining quality or employee relationships. He pushed for larger projects that stretched our resources thin. Twice I had to step in when his promises to clients exceeded our capacity to deliver. During this period, Thomas requested a substantial raise. The company was facing increased competition and tighter profit margins, but he insisted his marketing efforts justified higher compensation. Against my better judgment, I approved it. Around the same time, Amanda's social media activity caught my attention. Linda had never been interested in such things, but I created accounts after her death to stay connected with family. Amanda regularly posted photos of new jewelry, designer clothing, their backyard renovation including a pool installation, and exotic weekend getaways. Each post showcased luxury that even Thomas's generous salary couldn't easily support. Their financial demands increased. Their house needed extensive renovations, according to Amanda. Both their vehicles needed upgrading. Jackson required specialized sports training at an elite camp. Sophie needed orthodontic work not covered by insurance. Each request came with an implicit expectation that I would provide the necessary funds. I began to worry about their financial management skills. During a rare dinner at their home, I gently suggested meeting with the financial advisor who had helped Linda and me plan for retirement. "We're fine, Dad," Thomas insisted, his tone sharp. "We don't need financial babysitting." Amanda quickly changed the subject, but later that week requested $10,000 for landscaping. I provided it, but with growing concern about their sense of entitlement. My attempts to maintain relationships with my grandchildren faced similar resistance. I offered to pick them up from school one day a week, giving Amanda time for herself. The suggestion was rejected because it would disrupt their routine. I proposed weekend fishing trips with Jackson, remembering how Thomas and I had bonded during similar outings. Amanda thought it would interfere with his sports schedule. Even my offers to babysit for an evening, so Thomas and Amanda could enjoy some time alone, were politely declined. "The kids are at difficult ages," Amanda explained. "They really only settle for us or their regular sitter." Every suggestion was met with a reason why it wouldn't work. Every attempt at connection countered with an excuse for distance. I began to wonder if there was something wrong with me. Was I somehow difficult to be around? Had grief changed me in ways I couldn't recognize? During a company meeting, I suggested modifications to a proposal Thomas had developed. Nothing major, just adjustments to ensure we could meet the promised timeline. Thomas became disproportionately angry. "Why do you always have to control everything? Why can't you trust my judgment for once?" The outburst shocked everyone in the room. Thomas left immediately afterward, and I received a text that evening saying he was taking a few days off to clear his head. I tried calling but got no answer. That weekend, I drove to their house hoping to clear the air. Through the window, I could see the family gathered in the living room, laughing together. They appeared perfectly happy. When I knocked, the atmosphere instantly changed. Thomas answered with obvious surprise. "Dad, we weren't expecting you." The visit was awkward, conversation stilted. When I attempted to discuss what had happened at the meeting, Thomas shut it down. "Not now, Dad. Not in front of the kids, but there never seemed to be a right time." Every attempt at meaningful conversation was deflected or delayed. The distance between us continued to grow, a gulf I couldn't seem to bridge no matter how hard I tried. My 68th birthday arrived on a Tuesday. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't have been a significant milestone, just another year. But it was my third birthday without Linda, and the loneliness felt particularly acute. In the years before Linda's illness, birthdays had been warm, family-centered celebrations. Nothing extravagant, just dinner with Thomas, Amanda, and the grandkids. Linda would bake her famous chocolate cake, the same one she'd made for my 30th birthday when we could barely afford the ingredients. Thomas would give me some small token from the grandchildren, usually handmade cards that I treasured far more than any expensive gift. Last year, my first birthday after Linda's passing, Thomas and Amanda had taken me to dinner. The conversation had been strained, the grandchildren glued to their phones, but at least they had acknowledged the day. This year, I woke with modest expectations. Perhaps a phone call, maybe a text message, a card in the mail. I checked my phone first thing that morning. No messages, no missed calls. I told myself they were probably waiting until after work hours. I kept my phone close throughout the day, checking it during meetings, glancing at it during lunch. Nothing. By late afternoon, a familiar hollowness settled in my chest. The same feeling that had accompanied me through those first dark months after Linda's death. I scrolled through social media, hoping for even a brief public birthday wish. Instead, I saw Amanda had posted pictures that morning of new landscaping around their pool area, with a caption thanking Thomas for always providing the very best. Thomas had shared an article about luxury watches. Jackson had posted about his soccer tournament. Ordinary posts on an ordinary day. No mention that it was his father's or grandfather's birthday. I closed the social media apps and stared at my phone. Should I call them? It felt pathetic to remind my own family about my birthday. Linda would have known what to do. She had always been better at navigating family dynamics, knowing when to reach out and when to give space. Without her, I felt increasingly lost in my relationships. By 8 that evening, I had given up hope for any birthday acknowledgement. The rational part of my brain said it wasn't important. I was a grown man, not a child needing validation. But another part of me, the part still raw from grief and loneliness, felt the sting of being forgotten. I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey, the special bottle Linda had given me on our last anniversary together, and composed a simple text message to Thomas. Just wanted to let you know I missed hearing from you and the family today on my birthday. Nothing major, but it would have been nice to connect. Hope everyone is well. I read it 3 times before sending, making sure it conveyed hurt without accusation. Then I set my phone down and tried to distract myself with paperwork from the office. 1 hour passed, then 2. No response. At 11:30, just as I was preparing for bed, my phone chimed. A message from Thomas. I felt a momentary surge of relief. They hadn't forgotten after all. Perhaps there was a reasonable explanation. The relief evaporated as I read his words. We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore at all. I stared at the screen, certain I had misunderstood. I opened the message again and read it a second time, then a third. The words remained unchanged. Below the message, a notification appeared. Amanda liked this message. My hands began to shake. What had I done to deserve this? What grievous offense had I committed? I scrolled through our recent interactions, searching for clues. Had I been too critical? Too demanding? Too needy? Nothing seemed to justify such a cold, definitive rejection. I considered calling Thomas immediately to demand an explanation. But pride stopped me. If my son and his wife wanted space so badly they would dismiss me on my birthday with such finality, I would not beg for inclusion in their lives. Sleep was impossible. I paced the house until dawn, alternating between grief and anger. By morning, hurt had crystallized into suspicion. Something wasn't right. This abrupt severing of ties felt calculated rather than emotional. I drove to the office earlier than usual and began reviewing company financial records. As CEO, I had maintained access to all accounts, even after reducing my day-to-day involvement. What I discovered sent a chill through me. Thomas had been systematically diverting company funds into several accounts I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, beginning shortly after Linda's death. Consulting fees to companies that didn't exist. Inflated expense reports. Commission payments to non-existent clients. The amounts had increased over time, growing bolder after I had stepped back from daily operations. The total approached $300,000 over 3 years. Further investigation revealed Thomas had taken out a second mortgage on their home without my knowledge. Credit card statements showed balances far beyond what his salary could support. Designer furniture, luxury vacations, private club memberships. The spending was astronomical and unsustainable. That afternoon, I received a call from Walter Griffin, my oldest friend and golfing partner. His tone was hesitant, uncomfortable. Barnett, there's something you should know. I wasn't going to say anything, but after you mentioned that strange text from Thomas, Walter proceeded to tell me about a conversation he'd overheard at the country club. Thomas had been drinking with a group of younger businessmen, speaking loudly enough to be heard at neighboring tables. He had boasted about plans to push his old man into retirement, claiming I was losing my edge and becoming too emotional since Linda's death. He said something about getting you out of the picture completely, Walter admitted reluctantly. I assumed it was just the alcohol talking, but now I'm not so sure. The final piece fell into place later that day, when my assistant mentioned a recent meeting Thomas had scheduled with our corporate attorney. She had assumed I knew about it. I didn't. A quick call to the attorney confirmed my worst fears. Thomas had been inquiring about the process for declaring someone mentally incompetent. He had specifically asked about having a parent declared unfit to manage their business affairs due to grief and advancing age. The betrayal was breathtaking. My own son was not only stealing from the company I had built, but actively planning to have me declared incompetent to gain control of everything. The birthday text suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't about needing space. It was about eliminating my presence entirely. That night was the darkest of my life. Darker even than when Linda passed. At least then, The enemy had been a disease, something concrete to fight against. Now the threat came from my own blood, the son I had raised and supported without question. Sleep eluded me completely. I sat in my home office surrounded by photographs chronicling our family history: Thomas's high school graduation, his wedding day, the birth of his children. Behind each captured smile now lurked questions. How long had he been planning this? Had any of the affection been genuine? Was it all a calculated performance designed to extract maximum financial benefit? By dawn, I had moved beyond the initial shock to a deep, aching sense of failure. Somewhere along the way, I had raised a son who valued money more than family, who saw his father as an obstacle rather than a foundation. Where had I gone wrong? At 7 in the morning, I called Walter. His wife answered, concerned about the early hour, but Walter came to the phone immediately. "I've been expecting your call," he said. "You've been thinking about what I told you." We arranged to meet for breakfast at a small diner outside town, away from familiar faces. Walter listened without interruption as I laid out everything I had discovered: the financial deceptions, the legal inquiries, the birthday text that had started it all. When I finished, Walter sighed deeply. "Barnett, I'm going to say something you might not want to hear. This isn't entirely Thomas's fault." I started to protest, but he held up his hand. "Let me finish. You've enabled this behavior for years. Every financial demand met without question. Every position created without merit. Every problem solved with your checkbook instead of allowing natural consequences. You taught Thomas that money is the solution to everything, and now he's using that lesson against you." His words stung because they contained truth. I had substituted financial support for the harder work of parenting. Giving Thomas everything he wanted had been easier than teaching him to earn his way. In trying to provide the childhood I never had, I had prevented him from developing the character that adversity had forged in me. "So what do I do now?" I asked. "You do what you should have done years ago," Walter replied. "You let him experience consequences." After breakfast, I called my personal attorney, Roger Simmons, who had handled my affairs for over 20 years. We arranged an immediate meeting at his office. I brought all the evidence I had gathered about Thomas's financial misdeeds. Roger's expression grew increasingly grim as he reviewed the documents. "This is serious, Barnett. What Thomas has done could be classified as embezzlement. That's a criminal offense. I don't want my son in jail." I clarified quickly. "I understand. But you need to protect yourself and the company. If you allow this to continue, you're not only enabling his behavior but potentially putting yourself in legal jeopardy as CEO." For the next several hours, Roger and I reviewed my options. We examined the company structure, ownership shares, financial accounts, and family trusts. Linda and I had established generous provisions for Thomas and the grandchildren, but with important conditions and oversight. Thomas had been gradually working to circumvent these safeguards. We also discovered something I hadn't known. Thomas had accumulated substantial personal debt beyond even what I had uncovered. Multiple credit cards maxed out, personal loans with high interest rates. His financial house of cards was on the verge of collapse despite his generous salary and the additional funds he had embezzled. Amanda's spending was equally alarming. She had secret credit cards linked to company accounts that Thomas had set up. Monthly charges for clothing, jewelry, spa treatments, and social events totaled more than many of my employees earned in a year. By late afternoon, I had made my decision. It wasn't made in anger, though anger certainly existed. It wasn't made for revenge, though the hurt ran deep. It was made with clarity about what needed to happen for any possibility of genuine relationship restoration. First, I called my bank and halted all automatic transfers to Thomas and Amanda's accounts. These had been established years ago to provide extra support beyond Thomas's salary. Next, I froze the company credit cards in their names. Then I contacted the management company for our family vacation property in Florida and had the access codes changed. Back at my office, I worked with my IT director to revoke Thomas's access to company financial systems. We changed passwords and authorization protocols across the organization. I instructed the accounting department that no funds were to be dispersed without my personal approval, regardless of who requested them. That evening, I met with key members of the company board to inform them of temporary leadership changes. I didn't share all the details about Thomas's activities, but explained that we were addressing some concerning financial discrepancies and that Thomas would be taking a leave of absence. The final step was the hardest. I took out my phone and blocked Thomas's number, then Amanda's, then their home phone. I removed them from my social media accounts and email contacts. The digital severing of ties felt both terrible and necessary. Before going to bed, I wrote a letter to Jackson and Sophie expressing my love for them and explaining that some adult issues between their father and me needed resolution. I assured them that none of this was their fault and that my door would always be open to them. Whether they would ever see this letter was uncertain, but writing it helped clarify my own feelings. For the first time since Linda's death, I felt I was taking control of my life, rather than simply reacting to loss. The pain remained, sharper in some ways, but accompanied by a sense of purpose that had been missing. If there was to be any healing in our family, it would need to be built on truth, not deception, on mutual respect, not exploitation. I slept deeply that night, emotionally exhausted but resolute. The consequences of my actions manifested quickly. At 9:15 the next morning, I received a call from my assistant. "Mr. Aldridge, there's a very upset woman from Blue Sky Spa on the line. She says she needs to speak with you urgently about Mrs. Amanda Aldridge's account." Amanda had apparently tried to use the company credit card for her weekly spa appointment, only to have it declined. When she attempted to contact Thomas, he was discovering his own financial limitations. His corporate login no longer worked. The extra funds he had grown accustomed to accessing weren't available. By noon, the calls were coming from multiple sources. The private school where Jackson and Sophie attended reported a bounced check for their quarterly tuition payment. The luxury car dealership where Thomas and Amanda leased their vehicles called about missed payments. Their country club membership was flagged for account delinquency. The financial house of cards was collapsing rapidly. Each call I received painted a clearer picture of just how overextended Thomas and Amanda had become, living far beyond even their considerable means. At first, I directed these calls to voicemail. I needed time to strengthen my resolve before engaging directly. By late afternoon, my phone displayed 15 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Likely Thomas and Amanda using other people's phones since I had blocked their numbers. The voicemails began with anger. Thomas's voice, tight with fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Turn everything back on immediately." Then Amanda, "This is completely inappropriate and embarrassing. You can't just cut us off without warning." As the day progressed, the tone shifted from outrage to panic. "Dad, please call me back. We need to discuss this like adults. And later, there must be some misunderstanding. The kids' tuition payment was rejected. They can't go to school if this isn't resolved." By evening, the messages had become desperate. Thomas's voice cracked as he pleaded, "Dad, I'm sorry about the text. I was stressed and said things I didn't mean. Please call me back. We have bills due today that can't wait." The final count by midnight was 47 missed calls. That didn't include the calls to my office, my assistant, or other company executives, as Thomas tried every avenue to reach me. My email inbox filled with increasingly frantic messages, all of which remained unread. The following morning brought physical attempts at contact. Thomas appeared at my office only to be informed by security that he was on temporary leave and not authorized to enter the building. He created such a scene that they nearly called the police before he finally departed. Amanda sent 2 of her friends to my house, claiming they were concerned about my well-being given my strange behavior. My new security system, installed after I discovered Thomas's plans, prevented them from approaching the door. The security company called to inform me of the attempted visit, which I logged along with the other contact attempts. That afternoon, Thomas tried to access the family lake house, where he and Amanda often spent weekends. The property manager called to inform me that Thomas had become belligerent when told the locks and alarm codes had been changed. Again, threats of calling authorities were made before he departed. By the 3rd day, the missed call count had reached 83. The voicemails now included crying from Amanda about being unable to buy groceries and having their credit cards declined at restaurants. Thomas had moved from anger to bargaining, offering to discuss any concerns I might have about company operations. Throughout this period, I maintained my resolve, though it wasn't easy. Every instinct as a father urged me to answer, to help, to fix the situation. But Walter's words echoed in my thoughts. I had been fixing things for too long. Real change required holding firm. I wasn't without support. Walter checked in daily, sometimes visiting in person to ensure I wasn't alone with my thoughts too much. My assistant fielded calls with remarkable professionalism, never revealing my whereabouts or schedule. Several longtime employees expressed subtle support, though I had shared minimal details about the situation. The hardest moments involved thoughts of my grandchildren. Jackson and Sophie were innocent in this conflict, yet inevitably affected. Were they confused by the sudden change in their parents' behavior? Were they being told lies about me? Had they noticed the changes in their lifestyle as Amanda and Thomas faced real financial constraints for perhaps the first time? I found myself driving past their school one afternoon, hoping for a glimpse of them during pickup time. I recognized the familiar cars of other parents, but saw no sign of Thomas or Amanda's vehicles. Had they arranged carpools due to fuel costs? Were the children aware of what was happening? To manage my emotional struggle, I established new routines. Morning walks through the neighborhood, afternoon meetings with department heads at the company, reconnecting with operations I had increasingly delegated, evening dinners with Walter and his wife, or with other friends who had drifted to the periphery of my life during Linda's illness and after her death. I also returned to hobbies long neglected. Woodworking had been a passion before the demands of growing the business had consumed my free time. I found my old tools in the garage, many still in the custom cabinet Linda had given me for our 25th anniversary. Working with my hands provided focus and calm amid the emotional turbulence. The company benefited from my renewed involvement. I discovered several operational inefficiencies that had developed in my absence. Projects that had stalled under Thomas's management were re-evaluated and restructured. Employee morale improved as I reinstated monthly recognition programs that had been eliminated as unnecessary expenses. By the end of the week, the financial picture was clearer. Thomas had not only been embezzling, but had made several poor business decisions that prioritized short-term gains over long-term stability. Reversing these decisions would take time, but would ultimately strengthen the company's position. Throughout this period, I maintained my boundary of no direct contact with Thomas or Amanda. The calls continued but decreased in frequency as they realized I wasn't going to respond. The next phase would come on my terms, when I was ready, not in reaction to their escalating demands. 1 week after blocking all contact, I was having dinner alone at Marcello's, a quiet Italian restaurant where Linda and I had celebrated our anniversaries. The familiar setting brought comfort, and I had fallen into the habit of dining there on Friday evenings, bringing a book and enjoying the solitude. I was midway through my pasta when Thomas slid into the chair across from me. His appearance was shocking. Always meticulously groomed, he now looked disheveled. His normally clean-shaven face showed several days of stubble. His eyes were bloodshot from either lack of sleep or excessive drinking, possibly both. "Finally," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "You can't avoid me forever." The restaurant was nearly empty, with only 2 other tables occupied at the far end of the room. The owner, Marco, caught my eye with a questioning look. I gave a small nod indicating I was okay. For better or worse, this confrontation needed to happen. "How did you find me?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Your predictability," Thomas replied with a hint of the condescension that had colored our recent interactions. "You and Mom came here every anniversary for 20 years. Friday was your date night. It wasn't hard to figure out." I set down my fork and folded my napkin beside my plate. "What do you want, Thomas?" "What do I want? Are you serious?" His voice rose sharply before he caught himself, glancing at the other diners. "You've frozen our accounts, cut off all financial support, locked us out of company systems, and blocked our calls. You're destroying our lives, and you ask what I want? Your lives or your lifestyle?" I asked quietly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you and Amanda have been living beyond your means for years. It means you've been taking company funds without authorization. It means you've been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent to gain control of everything I've built. That's what it means." The color drained from his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." Don't insult my intelligence. I reached into my jacket and removed a folder containing selected documentation of his financial activities. I slid it across the table. Bank transfers to accounts I don't recognize. Consulting fees to shell companies. Expense reports for client meetings that never happened. Thomas flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from defiance to fear. And then there's this, I continued, placing a second document on the table. A record of your meeting with Roger Washburn to discuss having your own father declared mentally unfit. Did you really think Roger wouldn't tell me? He's been my attorney for 20 years. You don't understand, Thomas began, his voice now pleading rather than accusatory. We got in over our heads. Amanda has certain expectations, and the kids need what, Thomas? Private schools that cost more than a college education, European vacations, designer clothes, or do they need parents who demonstrate integrity, responsibility, and respect? He flinched as if I had struck him. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the son I remembered, the boy who had once cared about more than material possessions. Amanda has been pushing for a certain lifestyle, he admitted finally. Her friends all have these perfect lives on social media. She felt we needed to keep up. It started small, but then we couldn't stop. And the plan to have me declared incompetent? Thomas's gaze dropped to the table. That was never going to happen. It was just talk when I was desperate. Talk that you pursued with actual legal counsel, I pointed out. Talk that followed a text telling me never to contact you again. Talk that coincided with rumors about me losing my edge after your mother died. Tears welled in his eyes. I was wrong. I'm sorry. For the first time, his apology seemed genuine rather than tactical. But remorse alone wasn't sufficient to rebuild what had been broken. Your actions have consequences, Thomas. Legal consequences. The company could press charges for embezzlement. You could face criminal prosecution. You wouldn't do that, he whispered. I'm your son. Yes, you are my son. That's the only reason we're having this conversation instead of one with police officers present. I leaned forward. But being my son doesn't exempt you from accountability. I outlined the path forward. Thomas would need to acknowledge his actions to the board. He would repay every dollar he had taken from the company through a structured repayment plan. He would step back from company operations until trust could be rebuilt, working instead with our accounting department to document all financial improprieties. And Amanda? He asked. The kids? Amanda will need to adjust to a lifestyle aligned with your actual income, not the inflated lifestyle you've been sustaining through theft. The grandchildren's education will continue to be supported, but the extra funds for vacations, club memberships, and luxury items are gone. Thomas seemed to age before my eyes as the reality of his situation became clear. Amanda will leave me, he said quietly. She married me believing I would provide a certain lifestyle. Then she didn't marry you for the right reasons, I replied, remembering Linda's initial reservations about Amanda. And if that's the case, it's better to know now than to spend your life trying to buy someone's affection. Our conversation continued for nearly 3 hours. As the restaurant emptied and Marco began preparing for closing, the full story emerged. Thomas revealed how Amanda had increasingly compared their lifestyle to her friends, creating constant pressure for more expensive possessions and experiences. How he had begun with small financial manipulations that grew larger as they went undetected. How Amanda had convinced him that I was intentionally holding him back at the company. Most painfully, he admitted that the grandchildren had been told I was too busy to see them, even as I was sending texts and leaving voicemails asking to spend time together. Amanda had deliberately scheduled activities during times I had requested visits. She had intercepted birthday gifts and cards, telling the children they were just checks rather than the personal items and heartfelt notes they actually contained. Jackson asked about you last week, Thomas admitted. After your birthday, he remembered the date because you used to make such a big deal about sharing your cake with him. He wondered why we weren't going to your house. What did you tell him? That you were traveling for business, Thomas said, shame evident in his voice. I've been lying to them about you for months. Years, maybe. By the time we left the restaurant, a tentative framework for moving forward had been established. Thomas would come to my house the following day with Amanda for a fuller discussion. There would be no quick resolution. no immediate restoration of trust or financial support. But there was a path forward if they were willing to walk it honestly. As we stood in the parking lot, Thomas asked hesitantly, "Do you think you can ever forgive me?" "Forgiveness and trust are different things," I told him. "I will always love you as my son. Forgiveness is possible. Trust will need to be rebuilt, one decision at a time." He nodded, understanding the distinction and the work ahead. We parted without physical contact, the distance between us still palpable but perhaps slightly narrowed. The meeting with Thomas and Amanda the following day was predictably difficult. Amanda arrived defensive and hostile, having spent the night researching whether they could legally challenge my actions. She came armed with arguments about oral contracts and implied agreements regarding financial support. Her primary concern seemed to be the restoration of her previous lifestyle rather than the repair of family relationships. Thomas, to his credit, took responsibility for his actions. He admitted to the financial improprieties and his plans regarding my competency evaluation. With each confession, Amanda's expression grew more alarmed. Clearly, Thomas had not been fully transparent with her about the extent of his deceptions or the potential legal consequences. When I presented the full documentation of their financial situation, including the enormous debt they had accumulated, Amanda's demeanor shifted from indignation to fear. "We'll lose everything," she whispered. "Not everything," I corrected. "You'll lose the excesses you've been unable to afford. You'll lose the artificial lifestyle built on deception, but you'll have the opportunity to rebuild something authentic and sustainable." I presented them with two options. The first involved legal action, which would protect the company but devastate their family. The second offered a path to redemption that required significant lifestyle changes, financial restitution, and regular family therapy sessions with a professional mediator. The choice was ultimately simple, though Amanda clearly struggled with accepting the new reality. The alternative was simply untenable. Over the following weeks, the process of rebuilding began. Thomas worked directly with our company's financial team to document all misappropriated funds. The total exceeded what even I had discovered, approaching $500,000 over 3 years. A repayment plan was established, requiring Thomas to work in a reduced capacity at the company while taking a second job on weekends. Amanda initially resisted the necessary lifestyle adjustments. The first therapy session nearly ended in her walking out when the counselor, Dr. Harriet Reynolds, asked her to identify needs versus wants in their family budget. But as financial reality set in, with creditors calling and services being discontinued for non-payment, her resistance gradually gave way to reluctant acceptance. The most painful sessions involved discussions of the deliberate distancing of my grandchildren. Learning how systematically I had been removed from their lives opened wounds I hadn't even known existed. Amanda had constructed elaborate narratives about my disinterest in family activities, my preoccupation with work, even my mental stability. I genuinely believed some of what I was telling them. She admitted during one particularly raw session, "Thomas talked about your controlling behavior at work, and I projected that onto your relationship with the kids. It became easier to make you the problem than to acknowledge our own choices." Dr. Reynolds facilitated separate sessions with Jackson and Sophie, carefully navigating the complex family dynamics. The children had been confused by the sudden changes in their lives, the canceled club memberships, the withdrawn private lessons, the explanation that summer vacation would be at the local lake rather than in Europe. Initial conversations with them were awkward and strained. They had absorbed years of subtle and not-so-subtle messaging about my role in their lives. Jackson, now 15, was particularly distant, having reached an age where peer relationships were paramount and family connections less valued. "My friends have cool stuff," he told me during our first solo outing, a fishing trip to the lake. "Their parents take them cool places. Now we can't do any of that." "Things don't make people happy," I told him, remembering my own humble childhood. "Connections do. Accomplishments. Knowing who you are and being true to that person." "That sounds like something old people say when they can't afford nice things," he retorted. I laughed, appreciating his candor if not his materialism. "I could afford anything you might want," I said, "but things aren't what matter at the end of a life." Trust me on that. I sat with your grandmother as she was dying. She didn't talk about her jewelry or vacations. She talked about memories with people she loved. Something in my words seemed to reach him. For the first time, he asked questions about Linda, about my childhood, about the early days of building the business. Genuine questions, not the perfunctory inquiries prompted by parental coaching. Sophie, at 12, adapted more quickly. Less entrenched in the materialistic values that had defined their family culture, she seemed relieved by the increased simplicity. During our third meeting, she brought a photo album Amanda had kept hidden away. I found this in the attic, she explained, opening it to reveal pictures of family gatherings from years earlier. We look happy. We were happy, I realized, studying images of birthday celebrations, Christmas mornings, and backyard barbecues from when the children were small, before the pursuit of more had corrupted what was already enough. Financial restructuring was only part of the healing process. New oversight systems were implemented for both company and family finances. Thomas was removed from positions involving financial authority but continued working in areas where his marketing skills added value. Amanda took a part-time job at a local boutique, her first employment since college. The grandchildren were enrolled in financial literacy programs appropriate for their ages. When Jackson complained about not receiving the latest gaming system for his birthday, I offered to match any funds he saved from his allowance and neighborhood jobs. His initial resentment gave way to pride when he purchased the system with money he had earned. Not expected. Weekly family dinners became our new tradition, with an absolute moratorium on discussions of money or company business. These gatherings were uncomfortable at first, conversations stilted and artificial, but gradually, authenticity emerged. Thomas spoke of challenges at his weekend job without resentment. Amanda shared stories from her retail position, including her growing satisfaction in earning her own money. I attended Jackson's soccer games and Sophie's art exhibitions, rebuilding connections that had been severed. Thomas joined me occasionally, our relationship warming through shared pride in his children's accomplishments. On what would have been Linda's 70th birthday, we gathered at the house to plant a memorial garden. I shared stories about her that the grandchildren had never heard. Sophie helped arrange photographs around the garden space. Jackson surprised everyone by presenting a hand-carved wooden sign reading Linda's Garden, a project he had worked on secretly for weeks. Amanda approached me as the others moved inside for dinner. "I was wrong about you," she said simply. "I convinced myself you were trying to control us through money. I never considered you were trying to provide for us through love." Her acknowledgement marked a turning point in our relationship. Not instant trust or affection, but the beginning of respect that might eventually grow into something deeper. Thomas's journey of redemption progressed steadily. The company board recognized his efforts to make amends and gradually restored responsibilities aligned with his strengths. His commitment to repayment never wavered, even when it meant significant personal sacrifice. During our first Christmas under the new family paradigm, Thomas presented me with a wooden box he had crafted in the woodworking classes we had begun taking together. "I wanted you to have a place for Mom's special things," he explained as I opened it to find a velvet lining and partitioned spaces. "I remember how you always kept her favorite brooch and her reading glasses together." The gift represented more than its physical form. It showed observation, thought, personal effort rather than purchased extravagance. It reflected the values I had tried to instill, but had undermined through excessive financial support. That evening, as the family gathered around the modestly decorated tree in my living room, I reflected on the painful journey of the past year. The birthday text that had seemed so cruel had ultimately been a catalyst for necessary change. The temporary severing of ties had led to more authentic connection. The financial reckoning had created space for genuine relationship. Money, I realized, is neutral, neither inherently good nor evil. It's a tool that magnifies whatever values already exist. In providing financial support without corresponding character development, I had inadvertently encouraged entitlement rather than gratitude, dependency rather than capability. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care. In the forced simplification of our lives, We had rediscovered riches that had been obscured by the pursuit of more. Not every day was perfect. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced, requiring gentle correction. But the foundation was stronger, built on truth rather than pretense. As I looked around at my family that evening, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since before Linda's illness. She would have approved of these changes, difficult as they were. She had always seen more clearly than I did when it came to family dynamics. The journey continues, of course. Healing is rarely linear or complete, but we move forward with greater awareness of both our individual weaknesses and our collective strength. The family fortune no longer defines us. Instead, we are learning to create a different kind of wealth together, the kind that appreciates rather than depreciates with time. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that caused short-term pain but led to long-term healing? I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the hardest boundaries are the most necessary ones. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that genuine relationships built on truth are worth far more than any fortune.